All right, check, check. Can anyone hear me? Yeah? Hello, hello. Is it on? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for coming. Normally, I give my own introduction, so I really appreciated that. Thank you very much. My name is Mr. Neasley. I am the Public Archaeology Director from the San Diego Archaeological Center. And as you can see, I guess from the photos, can you see in the back there? Archaeology has taken me... A little louder? On the amplifier?
I don't know. Sebastian, do you remember which one?
Hello, hello.
Yeah, if you talk into the mic. Keep the mic.
Hello, hello.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Very good.
Perfect.
Really close to your mouth.
All right. So yes, archaeology has taken me all over the world, but I call my hometown here, right next to the Pataquitos Lagoon. So thank you guys very much for having me. What we're going to learn about today, go back. So this presentation is called 12,000 Years, the Interpretation of Material Culture in San Diego. Material culture is really a fancy archaeological term for artifact. Most people are familiar with artifacts, but archaeologists, we call it material culture, and we will see why here in a bit. But before we dive right into this 12,000 year topic, we kind of have to backpedal a little bit through time. That way? Oh, all right. We have to backpedal a little bit through time to understand how San Diego came to be in the first place. And we're going to start by looking at the geological record I got my little stick over here. Whoop. So all of human history occurs roughly in this little spot right here. So there's a lot of history that goes on before humanity. But as far as San Diego is concerned, we're really in this little period we call the Holocene. The Holocene is kind of like a warming period that occurred after the Ice Age. But right now we're talking about the Pleistocene because our entire genus is a species of the Pleistocene. So what is the Pleistocene? The Pleistocene is this, as more colloquially known as the Ice Ages, and it lasts for about 2.6 million years. And it's kind of punctuated up and down by these bell curves of these warm points and cold points. And so every time they kind of warm up, we get some really nice weather. Every time they dip back down, we get this freezing weather. But as I said, I got to get ahead of myself. The importance is it saw the entire evolution of our genus. So we start off with Homo habilis. Is evolutionary theory new to anyone? No? We all? Okay. We start off with Homo habilis, the tool maker. We're going to talk a lot about material culture, or the tool culture specifically of San Diego. Tool culture in our species starts with this individual, Homo habilis, around 2.8 million years ago. We then move on to Homo erectus, probably the most successful of our genus, who's stuck around for about 2 million years. From Homo erectus, we get up to a few little variants. Floriensis. Has anyone heard of Floriensis? The Hobbit? Yeah. Over in Indonesia. We have Heidelbergensis over in Germany. We eventually have Neanderthals. Everyone's heard of Neanderthals. Our cousins. And then we have us, Homo sapiens sapiens. We're about 300,000 years old, but we inherited this tool technology from Homo habilis. It's almost an unbroken technological line. So this important part is our species is the only one that survived this last interglacial period. A lot of geologists are even kind of claiming now that we might still be in the Pleistocene. We're just in a very weird, stable, long dip in one of these warm points. And with our ability to kind of push things into the atmosphere, we've extended our warm dip. But why were we the only species to survive? Archaeologists think that it's possibly because our adaptive tool technology, this tool technology we inherited from Homo habilis down through the line. So the important part about this Holocene period, right, this 12,000 years, we entered this new warm period called the Holocene. So the glaciers retreated, temperature fluctuations stabilized, giving us pretty much the 4 seasons we now like to enjoy here in San Diego. Agriculture gets invented. Archaeologists and anthropologists like to think of this long-term storage solution of agriculture, where somebody figured out if I put seeds in the ground, and now it's too cold, it's winter, I'm going to go migrate that way. When I come back in the spring, where I planted those seeds, we will now have plants. So I've essentially engaged in food storage for myself and my family. And so over time, we kind of figured out that if we plant all these seeds, we can have constant sources of food. This has major repercussions for our species because we no longer became obligate nomads. We didn't have to wander around anymore, or at least continuously wander. We were able to build these temporary structures. We were able to put up these permanent settlements and create permanent village sites. Everyone still with me? All right. And we adopted new hunting technologies. When you are a creature like a mastodon who is adapted to very cold weather, lots of snow, and frozen tundra, you don't do so good or do so well when you're in an area here, like here in San Diego. Does this work better? Whoa. Hello. Thank you much. So here is the classical map. That's a lot better. Here's the classical map of human migration that many of you have probably already seen. This has been the standard model for around 60 years of humans or species coming out of Africa around 200,000 years, settling in the Levant around 100,000, and then kind of brachiating out into different areas of the world, eventually coming to North and South America around 15,000 years ago. But the point where we came across, I'm used to my laser pointer, the Bering Sea, used to be called the Bering Land Bridge. We now refer to the Bering Land Bridge as Beringia. Thanks to technology, we've been able to scan the ocean floor, and we've realized that the Bering Strait, or the Bering Land Bridge, is actually a lot bigger. When you start looking at the actual sonar scans and the ground scans, you can see where there used to be above ground rivers. We can still see the scars in the land. We can even see areas, it's kind of hard to see out here, where there were gigantic lake deposits. So we know these areas were above ground. Based upon the level of water currently above the surface of the ocean here, we estimate that there was probably about a 10,000 foot wall of ice on both sides of Siberia and North America. That's roughly 2 miles or 3 kilometers high. If you want a physical description, San Jacinto Mountain is about 10,800 feet. That's probably about the same size as this ice wall. So if you're a migrating human, you get stuck in Beringia, then you're kind of trapped there for a long time. We do know now, because of these underwater scans and soil samples, that the northern section of Beringia was probably more like a frozen tundra, like we'd find in Alaska today. Then the southern part, down where the Bering Sea is, was probably more bog-like. So in the last 10 years, with more information coming in, we have readapted our model to think that humans were actually living up far more north than where we thought they were initially. Because if we had a choice of living in the tundra or a bog, most humans would choose to live in a tundra. So we base a lot of our knowledge of how humans moved around by how would we move around, right? We're the same species, just removed by time. So when we start looking at all the recent data coming in, because technology is getting better and better in archaeology, the land models and the artifact models are now starting to agree with Y chromosome dating, mitochondrial dating, X chromosome dating, all this genetic data that has been pouring in over the years, thanks to companies like 23andMe, or used to be, all these genetic companies. We have been solidifying more and more this timeline for when certain mutations happened coming into the Americas. One of the interesting things that we have kind of started to learn about Beringia, because humans wander in, right, into Beringia, 10,000 foot ice wall towards Siberia, 10,000 foot ice wall towards North America. You're kind of stuck there with all these other megafauna animals, with the Siberian tigers, with wolves. What we have found with genetic research is we think the domesticated dog might have actually come about by this 10,000 year period where we were trapped in Beringia. That this gray wolf went, hey, these humans are kind of nice, we'll hang around here, we'll growl at other creatures that come by and they'll leave the scraps for us, and we slowly kind of domesticated them that way. And so your Chihuahua might be the ancestor of a European or a Siberian gray wolf that got trapped in this place with ancient humans. So I like showing this model. This is a journal published. Science is very slow. Archaeology is even slower than most. What we see up here at the top is we see the list of author names. There is a lot of information out there about human migration and human evolution, human development, human ecology. What we like to show is that it's not only one person coming up with all these, sometimes crazy sounding ideas. It is a lot of different people. And if you can be a scientist that comes across this idea and you get, 20 colleagues to work on it, you all get put on the paper. There are a lot of papers out there that, have different information that only have one author. That is very problematic in the science world because it means you couldn't find one other colleague to agree with you. So if you're looking at scientific papers on, in general, look for multiple authors, multiple universities. It shows that it's actually past this peer review test period. And all the stuff coming in from Beringia, all the genetic data, all the articles that are coming out now about it all have multiple scholarships. So going back to our trapped ancestors, they're hanging out in this Beringia area right around 10 or 15,000 years ago. Right, the ice walls slowly start to melt. We hit that top part of that bell curve where everything starts evening out. And as you can see by the red line, essentially our species pours into North America. And we can tell from the material culture or the artifacts that it happens rather quickly. But before the red line, you guys in the back can see the blue line. We have a few oddball sites, archaeological sites in North America, Central and South America, that don't agree with our red line timeline, that predate this 15,000 year period. So if you have these 10,000 foot ice walls on either side of you and you're trapped, how do you escape into America, or into the Americas? We have this hypothesis called the Kelp Highway hypothesis, essentially being that ancient humans would have hopped on canoes or dugouts or some sort of floatable device and just kind of followed the fish or follow the animals, right? The animals are getting over the ice wall. So how do you? Well, maybe you sail down the coastline. We have a fairly accessible coastline as far as like landing points, docking points. And if you're stuck in the same area with people for 10,000 years, humans are going to continue to breed. We're going to continue to breed, numbers are going to get bigger, food sources are going to dwindle. At some point, you're going to kick out a bunch of the people you live with, or the young are going to jump on the boats and go make a new life for themselves somewhere. And so we think, and this theory is holding up to testing, that people did enter the Americas earlier than thought via canoes. So our first site we're going to look at is White Sands, New Mexico. It's been in the news lately. Has anyone heard of White Sands? It's been pretty popular. White Sands is special because it dates to about 22,000 years ago. What we found were fossilized human footprints. So how do we date 22,000 years? How do we get there? Archaeologists can't date anything fossilized because there's no carbon residuals. We basically look for organic material. What we found when we started digging through the layers, through these footprints, were grass seeds that humans had stepped on and crushed, and by doing so, accidentally preserved them. We find grass molecules, we find the grass seeds, we find a lot of this organic material. And essentially what we did is we kept digging. We started digging in striations. What we found was humans were here a lot longer than we thought. And so when we did our C14 testing, or carbon-14, where we test the amount of offshoot and isotopes, all the testing kept coming back between 20,000 and 22,000 years, which is incredible. But that's between 5,000 and 7,000 years earlier than we should have even been in the continent of North America. What we also found was a lot of fossilized footprints of some very large animals, between the mastodons, between the camelops, or the North American camel, between the giant sloth that used to roam around here, the smilodons, otherwise known as saber-toothed cats. There were a lot of big creatures prowling around. And so there is a section of footprints where it almost looks like someone is running with the bipedal gait, and we see saber-toothed cat footprints behind them, kind of walking in tandem. So we start thinking maybe this person was being stalked by this animal and didn't even know it, because the tracks seem to match the human tracks. We will never know because the footprints go straight into a military base. And so we can't dig there. But we can be left to our imaginations. The next one we have, and this is one of my favorites, is Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. So we have this beautiful piece of agate over here on the right-hand side. And we weren't actually looking for this. The story that came out was that some archaeologists from the University of Oregon were driving. The PI of the site had to pull over and relieve himself, and he went behind a rock to hide from all the grad students, looked down, and there was artifacts scattered all over the ground. And so he called over the students. They all began digging, opened a site, and within about 6 months, they found this piece of agate. And this agate is what's called a scraper, something like this. And it's used for essentially skimming off all the juices from inside the hides of thick animals. Depending on the size, you can use it to peel skin off vegetables. You can use it to scrape things in general. It's a sterile tool. But what was important about this agate is they found dried blood on it. And dried blood, being organic, we can now date and test. So it actually belonged to a megafauna bison. And the bison lived about 15,000 to 18,000 years ago. Then they continued digging, and what they found up here in your left-hand corner is the enamel off of the tooth of a giant camelops. And so we could date that. Came back around 18,000 years. We also were like, okay, well, this is a kind of like an oopart, or an out-of-place artifact, right? It doesn't belong here. Well, then they kept digging, and about 10 miles away, they found fossilized human feces. It's like, okay, we were here. Can't deny it now. But what was amazing about the camelops enamel and the agate scraper is that we found them kind of Ziploc bagged between 2 layers of Mount St. Helens ash. So we know that these things weren't messed with. They weren't tectonically moved around. They didn't fall out of place. They're still in situ where they were left. In situ is just in place. So we know because of Mount St. Helens' explosions that these are exactly where they were dropped, which adds further credence to people being here before 15,000 years ago. Then there's some weird ones like Pedro Ferrata. This one's down in Brazil. This one is contested even among archaeologists, but I like showing it because the artwork has been proven to be genuine. It's kind of hard to see, but the artwork is a picture of a megasloth, a saber-toothed cat, and some other Ice Age animals in incredible detail that paleontologists will say is historically accurate. So if these dates in Brazil line up with our standard model migration, that means that humans in Beringia told a story to their kids about what a giant sloth looked like, and then for the next 200 generations, they kept giving the same amount of detail to every generation after them, which is probably not going to happen. So the assumption is that the people who drew these pictures saw these animals with their own eyes and then drew them in detail. Below these pictures, because these pictures were drawn in ochre. It's like an iron pigment. It comes in reds, yellows, browns, purples, blues. So it's not blues. Below these, we found charcoal chutes, or like these chimney structures where they were heating up wood. And we know that if you put ochre near fire and you kind of control it, you can change the color of the ochre. It's been something very common humans have been doing all over the world. So we find these chimney chutes that look the same as they do in Asia, in the Levant, and in Europe. We tested the charcoal, right? Charcoal being an organic material at one point. And we started finding that the dates ranged upwards of 40,000 years. So if our standard model is no one's here before 15,000 years ago, where did all these come from? So, I hear that one a lot. So we had to start adapting our modeling systems because we do have these rare sites that are popping up. But after 15,000 years, we know from the geologic record, from all the ice core records, that these ice walls, these 10,000-foot ice walls, finally collapse in. Like the water fills in, and people kind of scramble to get out of Beringia, going either back towards Siberia or into the North American continent. And the second they get past that ice, you can kind of see all the arrows suddenly spread out as they kind of fly across the continent. Sorry? The stars are those the sites. So we have Pedro Ferrata's the first star, White Sands, Pedro Ferrata's down there, Paisley Caves, and then White Sands. Those are our 3 rare sites. You kind of see they're all accessible by the coastline. So once this 15,000 year period starts, all these red dots represent a place where we have found human technology, specifically Clovis points. spearheads that are like, they're this size. They are giant. You're not hunting rabbit, you're not hunting deer with these. You are hunting big, large animals. And we find Clovis points suddenly all across the United States within 2,000 years. Humans are moving fast. There was a reporter, or journalist, excuse me, in the early 1990s that was looking at human migration models and wondering to himself, if I wanted to walk from Africa to North America, how fast could I do it? And Nat Geo, right, they talked to all the embassies, they gave him a passport, and they dropped him off in Central Africa, and they let him walk. And it took him 6 months to get to Seattle. So, right, humans are very efficient walkers, and we walk real quickly over a lot of terrain. But we, archaeologists, feel that because of modern roads, he probably had it a little easier than, ancient peoples. But the model is still there, about 6 months. So if we extend it out to 2 years, that's still a lot of ground you can cover within one generation. These Clovis points are everywhere. And this is where our material culture studies really start showing up. Why are they building these points this big? It has to be because you are hunting megafauna animals that were alive during the Ice Age. You are hunting mastodons. You are hunting giant sloth. You need a big point to take down a big animal. And so we find these everywhere, which also tells us that the ecology of the US at the time did consist of these remnants of these Ice Age animals. So what they were going to do, right, if you're going to hunt a mastodon, you're not going to shoot it with an arrow. You're going to use one of these guys. This is an atlatl, or an atlatl dart, and you essentially have what looks like a dog chucker, those ball toys, and it extends the reach, so you can actually shoot these a good 100 yards. So if you're aiming at a mastodon, you want to be as far away as possible, because that is a large animal that does not want to be eaten. We know from mammoth bones in Europe with Neanderthals that one of the preferred ways of hunting mammoth was to run up underneath them and stab up. And we find lots of broken bones in the Neanderthal bone population, probably from the animal either swinging its tusks back and forth or falling on you. So our species, Homo sapiens sapiens, kind of figured out, oh, we could just chuck this thing 100 yards at it, and if we hit it, we're lucky, great. If we're not, if we plan our stratigraphy right, we can scare it, make it run, and make it drive itself off a cliff. And it's done the same job. So, but if you look at the average size of a 6-foot human versus a North American mastodon, that is not a creature you want to get up close with. So the technology, this material culture that we're finding, indicates that we are actively hunting these very large animals. Around the 10,000 year period, however, we suddenly stop seeing these big Clovis points. We suddenly stop finding a lot of mastodon remains and tusks, and the points change in their size. They get a little smaller. They get a little smaller all across the US. A lot of them become fluted. That's in reference to how the bottom looks, where there's a divot, which means you're now you're embedding them inside of something smaller. The technology's changing. Typically with these types of weapons, you would make a knock in a piece of wood, take some like pine resin, heat it up a little bit, mix in some charcoal and some lime, and when you pour it over, you create a pitch. And it's like a cement that cements these in place. Well, once you throw an atlatl dart, right, if it gets stuck in the animal or it breaks, you've lost your tip. Or if you break you're lucky enough to get it back, but you have a broken pole, it's hard to remove these from pitch. And so when we start hunting smaller animals and that don't provide enough meat, you don't want to spend half of your time flint knapping. And so what they would do, they would flute them instead, and they changed the way we were actually putting them into the wooden shafts. So they're easier to remove because we're getting smaller amounts of food. We start finding these all over the place. Why? Because we've killed all the bigger food. That end, right, if you're a mastodon designed for, like I said in the beginning, ice and cold weather, and now the weather's heating up and you're becoming much more like kind of how San Diego is today, or North America is today, right? You're just going to die off naturally because the environment no longer suits your morphology. So between 10 and 8,000 years, we begin finding these smaller points. Is anyone familiar with this mural? This mural was outside the zoo, I believe, about 30 years. It's now inside the zoo. This is an artist's rendition of how San Diego looked during this about 8,000 year ago period. All the ice from the glaciers is melting, right? The water is gathering in the Central Valley. The Central Valley then has these outlets, and some of the outlets come into San Diego. All of this water turns San Diego into a giant wetland. So we still have these mastodon hanging around. We still have the giant sloth. We still have the saber-toothed cats. But we start picking up birds like flamingos, start living here because the weather's right. And one of the only animals, though, to survive this period is, does anyone know? Condor. Yeah, the giant condor, California condor. We still have a nice population right next to the Archaeological Center up at the safari park. So if you haven't been in a while, I highly recommend checking out the condor exhibit. They've been doing a lot of work to it, and they've been very successful in bringing these creatures back. But as this environment's changing, right, all these animals start dying or moving. The big ones die, the small ones move on, particularly the capybara we used to have living here. So how long have people lived in San Diego? This kind of brings us back to the beginning of our story about 12,000 years. Archaeologists, we are comfortable saying 12,000 years. And the reason is that we have found no material culture beyond 12,000 years. That is not a surprise because, right, if Paisley Caves up in Oregon is 18,000 years, White Sands is 22,000 years, Pedro Ferrada is 40,000 years, why is San Diego only 12? That makes no sense. I mean, we still have some of the best weather in the world, and I think we probably did back then too. So why would people not stop here on their way down? Well, it's really the ecology of San Diego and the geology. During an ice age, the beach was another mile that direction because of all the water locked in ice. So Bataquitos Lagoon would probably have been just a grassland without all the water in it yet, because all the water's way out there. So anyone living in San Diego beyond that 15,000 year period, all of their village sites, all of the material culture that archaeologists could find is way out there in the ocean now. So what we do find archaeologically that puts us at 12,000 years starts to deal with migration patterns that are more contemporary than they are ancient. Not to mention some of the soil here is either very acidic, so it destroys any fibrous products, or because of the earthquakes we have and the amount of DG we have around here, the seismic activity just kind of grinds away objects over time, and we just can't identify them anymore. So yeah, according to archaeological evidence, at least since the start of the Holocene. So we have what we call complexes in archaeology, and not the mental kind. We all have those. But so we have this lithic complex, or this family of material cultural items. So if it looks all the same to archaeologists, we will say it's part of the same culture. That's all that means. So this is the San Diego culture. This is as far back as we can go. And around this 12,000 to 7,000 year period, all the items are very large, very bulky. We are still hunting megafauna creatures, right? So we need bigger scrapers, bigger knives, bigger blades. And it's all made out of the local metavolcanic stuff that we have here. As a flint napper, I can tell you firsthand that San Diego has lousy stone to make tools from. We don't have any natural sources of obsidian. We have to get them either from up in like Mammoth, or we can go really far east towards Arizona, or we can go south into Mexico. So we're stuck using a lot of the metavolcanic material, which is incredibly dense and it's incredibly hard to nap. So the peoples of the Digito complex were expert nappers, but they were also designing large tools to break into bones to skin large hides. And we find the Digito complex tools everywhere from south as Tijuana, as north as the Central Valley, and as east as Anza Borrego. So they are pretty widespread to this area. But we found them at the C.W. Harris site over in Rancho Santa Fe, out in the Digito River, which is where they get their name from. Malcolm Harris, down here on the left-hand side, dug a trench about 40 feet deep, and that's about where the San Diego history starts, is 40 feet beneath us, at least in Rancho Santa Fe. And what he found was the accumulated amount of objects from a series of flash floods that the fast-moving water picked up all these artifacts and kind of moved them downstream. And the second there was a bend in the river, dropped all these rocks off in the middle section of the river in a sequence of floods. And so you can kind of see with the red arrow that it all kind of got dropped off. I don't know if I have the other one. No. And so he finds these and he goes, aha! And he starts to put together this Digito complex culture. Because a few years later, they start finding them out in Anza Borrego, and they find them in Central Valley, and they find them in Tijuana. And they all find them right around the same depth. They find them in the same stratigraphy. stratigraphy being the types of soil. To give an example, that about 10 years ago, 2 years ago, we had that hurricane that moved through here. There was a lot of soil that washed off Torrey pines down to some of the lower cliffs and left this 1-inch deposit on there, which geologists now say is part of a geologic event. And in, say, 1,000 years in the future, if a geologist is digging there, we will now, I don't think they've settled on a name yet for it, but you can call it the Padres stratigraphy, right? But we now know exactly kind of where it was from. We know roughly, relatively, how far back each of these layers go. So we call it relative dating. Relative dating in all the cases of finding the Digito complex all puts it between 7,000, 12,000 years. Yes, found large deposits of scrapers and points. So this is 1938. And we were able to date the La Jolla group artifacts on top of it, because right on top of that were a bunch of seeds and acorns and other organic material that C14 dating allows us to date accurately. So we know that these artifacts are older than 8,000 years. So here's some illustrations that he did of the artifacts he found. You see kind of like the Clovis points here. There's still, large blunt weaponry designed to be inserted with pine pitch into some wooden shafting. So we have a lot of problems with the Harris site. As far as the traditional sciences go, archaeology is still a little young in our methodology. Originally, right, as a lot of us know, has anyone visited the British Museum? That was us. A lot of that stuff did not come, we'll say legally, but in the late 1800s, archaeology liked to use dynamite. We had some dodgy excavation practices, and as we've kind of improved on all of this stuff. Harris is kind of the last of those early breeds of archaeologists, and he did a few things that we don't agree with nowadays and actually harms our understanding of San Diego history. For one, he didn't publish his excavation reports. So, in fact, until 1991, 91? No archaeologist published their report, and we actually joked that it was a curse of the site. Until Richard Carrico came along. He's kind of a local San Diegan. He was one of the first archaeologists to publish a full archaeological report in 91. But the big problem with the site is how they collected their artifacts. They like to use shellac. They like to clean the artifacts in chemical detergents. They sealed things in boxes and then put like enamel around them. So the chemicals just kind of destroyed everything. They hid artifacts in attics and basements. So we've lost all this provenience. We've lost all the data on how we got it. And so in an effort to try and preserve these items with shellac, they accidentally destroyed any data these items could have given us. We haven't found anything else because they kind of cleaned the site with bulldozers. And the other Harris site that could have given us information now has a big building on top of it, and it's cement bedrock. And so we lost most of this info. So all the Digito stuff we still get comes out of the desert now in Anza Borrego. So here's an example of some of these early sites. You can kind of see with the Digito sites, they are all across the coastline. We know, like I said earlier, that because the ocean was another mile that direction, there were probably a lot more coastal sites, and these ones are representative of inland sites, even though they are now directly on the coastline. So eventually we get to the Middle Holocene, about 7,500 to 3,000 years ago. Here is where we see a firm break, and we know that we are no longer in this Ice Age Pleistocene temperament. So we see it most in the materials that are used to harvest food. And what we find during this period is a lot of different tools designed for cracking shells. During the early 7,500 part, we find a lot of abalone. Abalone is good eating, if you're an ancient person. It's big, it's meaty, it's easy to catch. Typically they're 10 feet below the surface of the water. You can dive down and get them. As time goes on, the abalones start disappearing from our archaeological record, and we get more shells like these. These start showing up in shell middens by the thousands. And abalones become very few. By the time we get to 3,000 years, however, these begin to disappear as well, and we start getting these really tiny ones, those ones that hang out at the coastline on the beach. We start finding millions of these. So that tells us that times are getting tough. if you are no longer eating abalone and your life relies around eating these tiny little, I forget what the name of those are, zebra mollusks. What was that? Yeah. Yeah, so if your dinner relies on eating those, how many of those tiny shells do you think you have to eat to get full? Now, collect enough for your entire family, then your entire village. Because a lot of indigenous societies around the world, right? If you're hungry, everyone else is hungry. If you're full, everyone else is full. If you're full and everyone else is hungry, you're about to have a problem. Everyone's shared. So if your entire village is sharing these little clams for your dinner, you're having a rough time. And we start finding a lot of those in the 3000 period. So here's an example of our shell cracker. It's essentially a rock that they've flint knapped a ridge into it so you can break the back. If it's really large, like an abalone, or if it's a pretty shell, the other technique we find that starts popping up during this period are stone awls, little sharp, twisty drill bits. And we'll find that right at the back of the shell, where the joint is that allows it to hinge, we'll see a little drill point. Early archaeologists thought that they were just making a bunch of jewelry out of shells, but some experimental archaeologists looked at indigenous cultures, and they found that if you drill a hole into the hinge of the shell will try and open itself up. And so it was a far easier way to get that little pesky shellfish to open itself up rather than you try and pry it open or crack it open. And then afterwards, once you eat it, you can then use it for jewelry. But drilling a hole in the back is the easier way. We start seeing it where that red arrow is B. It's now higher up, where all this stuff's starting to occur. So closer to where we're standing now. We also see during this period that our blade technology and our points have now changed again. They are getting smaller. They are getting more refined. We now have blade technology where we've changed the way we flint knap. We're no longer taking rocks and smacking off an edge. Now we're taking a core, we're taking an antler piece, and we're kind of lining a stick up and we're smacking the stick, and we create these long, beautiful blades, very, very, very thin. And we start seeing trade happen because we start finding a lot of obsidian in San Diego, or obsidian tools, meaning people are coming from far away and they are migrating back and forth and traveling. We also find this nifty little tool on the right bottom. This is an arrow straightener. We find that if you're gonna go shoot an animal for dinner, it's not the arrowhead you necessarily need to pour your time into. Any sharp rock will do. But if your arrow isn't perfectly straight, you can shoot at that animal all day long and your arrow is gonna zip off in every direction. And so we start carrying these, they start bringing these larger rocks in, they heat them up, and they pull them out with some sticks, and they take their the arrow shaft, and they run it through those grooves, and it will not only burn off any bark on the outside, but it kind of steams the wood, and then you can manually straighten the arrow out. Do that a few times, and you're good to go. So, means of survival. We also start seeing what is recognizable to us as manos and metates popping up in the cultural record here. These ones are typically bigger, but it tells us, as archaeologists, what's going on with the food again, right? So now we have rocks designed for cracking up in shellfish. We have awls for shellfish. We have smaller arrowheads. We're now relying on these smaller, more refined tools for smaller animals like deer, rabbit. And so now we're also taking access of the acorns in the area, the grains, the seeds. So this tells us that the people have been here for so long now that they have adapted to what's growing naturally in the region, and they've expanded their dietary sources. So yeah, lithics become smaller, grinding stones. So I get ahead of myself sometimes. By the time we get to the late Holocene, we have 3,000 years to 300 years ago. We are in this final period, the late prehistoric tradition. Do we have a lot of hikers here? This seems like a hiking group. These holes in the bedrock, have you guys all seen these before? They are all over San Diego. What these represent to us is an evolution of that monometate that they're portably bringing everywhere with them when they travel from the coast to Anza Borrego. This tells us, archaeologists, they are settling down. You are settling down in such great numbers that you have a food processing area that has been designated by your village. So the idea is that certain parts of the day, multiple people would all come to the same spot. They would socialize and they would process their food together rather than, having to do it in the comfort of their houses. We also start seeing at this point pottery showing up. Pottery is great for this area, particularly with pottery that's designed to hold water. right? We don't get a lot of rain in San Diego, so when you find a freshwater source, you want to keep it, cloistered. So the pottery was a great way to do that. We also see a final transition in these arrowheads. So you see in the back that some of them are wavy on the end. We've come to realize that it's not necessarily the size of the arrowhead. It's not necessarily the knock on the side, what you pop it into, that you can make one size arrowhead. And if you have that, it's like a bread knife, those curves of the bread knife, that it will actually do more work for you. So we've now super engineered these points to where they do most of the work and we don't have to. So we see these have different designs depending on where you are in the US. In San Diego, ours kind of look like this. We find that our arrow straighteners have also gotten smaller, and they've gotten simpler too, meaning we've changed the wood we're using for the arrows. The Kumeyaay that have stopped by the museum have told us that their ancestors used a lot of willow and the manzanita, if you could find it. And you could just straighten out those really gnarly looking twigs by soaking them in water and then pass them through the hot rock. We also find much smaller monometate basins. The Kumeyaay the people of this area, the indigenous people, they developed a migration pattern where they would stop here at the beach in spring and summer. They would be in Anza Borrego in the wintertime. And then when spring started to happen, they'd go up into the mountains. And then when summer started happening, they'd be here on the beach because you did not want to be in Anza Borrego in the summertime where it's 110, 120 degrees. They'd stay here through fall and they would slowly migrate back. And so the thinking is that they would carry these portable monometate basins with them. So some of them are pretty small, which tells us again, they have changed what they're harvesting with certain things. So for the big mounds on the right, they're probably processing things like acorns, heavy items. But for the smaller ones, they're probably processing buckwheat, or a lot of smaller seeds, a lot smaller grains. There is a joke amongst archaeologists that we probably miss half of the metates in the desert, because when the Kumeyaay left, or when the Kumeyaay started their migration back to the coast, they would flip the metates upside down. And we've talked to some tribal elders. We're like, why would you do that? And they were like, oh, well, so there's this story that the god Coyote, would pull pranks on us. And he would tell his children that if he caught us with our metates not flipped over, they would use them as toilets. He told them to go prank us. And indeed, sometimes when we find metates that aren't flipped over in the desert, they're great toilets. So we miss half of them because they're flipped over. But those are the bigger ones. But we see them here at this late period getting very small. We also see, and this is really cool when we find it, evidence that they are now using the local fibers to help shape their baskets, because we start finding fiber imprints inside the oyas, which lets us know kind of what they're doing. It lets us know how they're braiding all the fibers. So we imagine at this point that the Kumeyaay have now adopted the sandals, the baskets, the shakers that we know of today. And we do find the imprints of them on the inside of these broken oyas. So around 300 years ago, we see a disappearance of the material culture for the ancient peoples of San Diego. And that's mainly because of the Spanish arrival. So archaeologists, we break these periods up into post-contact and pre-contact, is how you see it here in, at least at our museum and down in Balboa Park. Because after the Spanish arrived, the Spanish essentially said, you can no longer make your tools, you can no longer do your lithics, you can no longer hunt the way you did, grind the acorns, make the showy, play your games. They, in fact, where our museum is, they opened up a conversion abbey. And so the San Pasqual Band of Mission Indians had to report there every day, and their kids learned the new language and the new religion, and they were banned from all their older traditions. Archaeologically, this is bad for us because it does show an erasure of an entire culture. Luckily, that culture is still around, and it is making a wonderful revival. There's a great new cultural center out at Verona. If you guys haven't been there, it's wonderful. Yeah. So I was talking to you guys at the beginning about development. Development is the enemy of archaeology. And so what we're concerned about now in San Diego is we can only trace back 12,000 years because of, like I said, the specific geology we have here. Development's making it even harder because the developer will always win. We're always in a rush for new houses, new supermarkets, new buildings, new everything. And even though archaeologists are required to be on site of all development in California, the people working for the developers and the contractors don't like being stopped. If archaeologists tell them to stop working, they stop getting paid. So we have a bit of an impasse. The picture I have here is probably the most vivid example. This is the construction going on right now for the Tren Maya down in Mexico. It's gonna be a bullet train that goes from Mexico City to Teotihuacan in Cancun. So the archaeologists are basically racing in front of the bulldozers and the loggers, and they are finding things hand over fist that help show like what the Maya were doing, and they're kind of rewriting Maya history. The same thing happens here in San Diego, where there's some great examples where we find stuff, we're like, wait, hold on, and then we come back the next day and there's a shiny slab of concrete that's already been laid. So we are losing lots of information in the form of progress. So our center, has anyone been to the Archaeological Center? Yeah, a few of us? Perfect. We were formed in 1993. We were originally downtown off Carnation Street, but we were founded because a developer in Poway found a plot of land that he wanted to put some condos on, and he found there was a giant boulder on his land, and when he started looking around and clearing the brush, the boulder had some labyrinth pictographs that were carved all over it. Well, he wanted to put a big shiny house there, and so brought out a bulldozer and smashed it to pieces. In the process of doing that, he got fined by the state because yeah, that's a big endeavor to take. He got fined $168,000. That was it. But that $168,000 became our seed money. There was a site up in Vista recently. Similar kind of thing happened. They were building up a brand new building. They put restaurants in there and housing complexes. And the archaeologists stumbled upon a village site and possibly a graveyard. They said, stop. They stopped it for about 2 weeks. Came back, shiny piece of concrete. Developer was fined $50,000. Yeah, $50,000. It's ridiculously low. And so we've been trying to lobby the state to increase the fines. California has the strictest laws for archaeology in the country. But to a developer, $50K, whatever, that's a slap on the wrist and back to work. So we took this seed money and we began the process of slowly becoming the largest archaeological repository in San Diego, or in Southern California. We work very closely with the indigenous community to make sure that their stuff gets back to them, the original owners. So now, when you have archaeologists on site, if we do discover some stuff, we practice what we call salvage archaeology, where we work real quickly around the contractors to recover all this stuff. They box it up, they put labels and stuff on it, they send it to us, and then we work with local communities to figure out who it goes back to. Currently, we have over 2 million items in our storage. We're expected to get another million in the next 10 years with the rate of current development. But we luckily work with a lot of these tribal partners because there's 17 tribal governments and 18 reservations here in San Diego. California has more tribal identities than anywhere in the rest of the country combined. So last I checked, I think we had like 200 individual cultural groups just in California alone. But 17 of those are here in San Diego. And we have a very good relationship with them, luckily. Now, why is this important? Because people have been living here for 12,000 years. So chances are you live very close, you and I all live very close to an old archaeological site or a tribal village. So I have a map here. Each one of these dots in San Diego, it might be hard to see in the sunlight. Each one of these dots represents a tribal village that had at least 1,000 people or more. And which I think is amazing because it's probably within 10 miles of all of us. Now, when I first saw this map, when I was a young archaeologist a long time ago, I was looking at this map and I was like, oh, I see Bataquitos Lagoon, right? I see, there's a dot there. Oh, what's that dot? And I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, I live here. If I were to walk, oh, that's the Vons up the street. The Vons up the street used to be an Indian village or native village. I don't know when that Vons was built or when that complex was built, but it used to be a major village site. Archaeologists knew it was there. Same thing with the Home Depot in Encinitas. The Home Depot is also on this map. It also used to be a large village site. So developers, right, they're going to win in the end. But so archaeologists now, we're kind of the last interpreters of history when we come across these sites, because no one's going to see them again. They're going to be buried beneath cement, buried beneath asphalt, and our recording is the last thing told of the people that live there. So I kind of got to hit myself again. So each one of these white boxes represents one of those development sites. We have 3 different vault systems in the SDAC. This one's our red vault, named for the color. But this is the one that has 2 million items in it. And we are quickly running out of space. So we are always in a race to repatriate as fast as possible. We are the only site in San Diego that does curation and storage. So we care for the artifacts. Because once they're dug up, you cannot put them back in the ground. Right? That's, so curate to care for. We take those in. We make sure they get treated properly. They get stored properly. They're in a humidity-controlled environment. They're in an earthquake and fireproof environment. So we do a lot of work to try and take care of these items, be the new stewards for them. So we do use some items to show to the general public, which we've all cleared with the tribal communities and governments. We have a lot of items that have no provenience, meaning we don't know where they came from. We have a lot of people that come in, they'll be like, hey, my grandfather found this beautiful Oya back in the 1920s. He passed away. We don't know what to do with it. We don't want it. Do you want it? And so we used to, 20 years ago, take all this stuff in. And the tribal governments have given us permission to put them on display and actually show the history of the people that lived here. We, about once a month, get someone that shows up that didn't know anyone lived here until Jackson drove everyone west with the Trail of Tears. So we do still have this education gap, and my department, Public Archaeology, finds it really important to do events like this and to really engage the public. We have found that scientists are typically bad social communicators, and archaeologists are worse because we like to be out in the middle of nowhere in a hole talking to no one. So, right, studying people that can't talk back to us. So finding an archaeologist that does like to speak to people is rare, and we like going to see the public. And also just be like, hey, I met an archaeologist today. You don't hear that very often. So we do a lot of education. But because of the rich history of San Diego, we also have a historic collection, or a post-contact collection, particularly Block 112, which was an area in San Diego that eventually is now Petco Park. Petco Park, before it was Petco Park, and back in the 1800s, you had a Chinese village that was brought in, or Chinese that were brought in. They created the Chinese village there to build the railroads. After that was done, they were evicted and the Irish were moved in. And then when the Irish weren't trusted anymore, the Irish were kicked out. Then the Hispanics were moved in and the Hispanics were kicked out. And so then it eventually became the gas lamp, and then eventually Petco Park. But we have a record of the day-to-day lives of all the people that lived there through all these other different cultural periods. So it's quite unique to come take a look at and then compare that to your own life. It's also interesting to look at the trash that remains, because in reality, all material culture is trash that we've left behind. Humans are great litter bugs. And so we're essentially looking at all the useful litter through history. And when it comes to the contact period, there was lots of cod liver oil and medicinals and a lot of soda. But so the importance of public archaeology, I thought I got ahead of myself again, in this 12,000 year history is just getting out to the public and talking about it. But we do a lot of stuff. We do outreach like right now. We do a lot of academic lectures. This coming Saturday, so a week from today, we have, what is his name? We have a speaker coming in who's going to talk about the geologic history of San Diego going back 150 million years. So I believe it's a $15 entrance fee, but it's open to the public. He's a fantastic speaker, Mike Thacker, fantastic speaker. And he talks all about how San Diego became how it is today. It's a lot of violent geologic forces, but we do academic lectures. We do field trips. We are stocked year-round with field trips for schools coming in, K through 12, which is great. The kids are brilliant. We have a lot of hands-on program. We do Pleistocene pigments. So if you want to learn about how you change colors of ochre, right, we show you that. We do flint knapping classes. We have a basket weaving class coming up from our tribal coordinator in August. So if you want to learn how to do kumeyaay basketry techniques, she'll be there to teach you. We also do a lot of experimental archaeology, and this is where my background in lithics kind of comes in. The last Saturday of every month, we have archery, And so you can fire Mongolian bows, Kumeyaay bows, Chinese bows, English bows, French bows, and see how people have adapted the same technology to different uses. We also have our atlatl. This goes on quarterly. These are surprisingly hard to throw. We have found the best atlatl users are actually kids. Adults, terrible at it. Kids, hit it every time. So it's something about the hand-eye coordination, or maybe it's my personal joints. I don't know. But atlatl is fun. And then we teach a lot of professors and other archaeologists. We are not experts in all things. And so when it comes to San Diego, if I were to find a basket, right, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm not a basket person, but I know basket archaeologists. If they find flint-knapped tools, they would come to me. So we are kind of a hub for training for all the different facets of archaeology, and how do we preserve all this information coming in and get a reliable interpretation out of what we're looking at. Because that's all we're really doing when we're recreating this history of San Diego. We're looking at the interpretation as we see it. And we try and do that as unbiasedly as possible by bringing in as many experts as possible in different fields, and then just arguing back and forth, which is typically how science works. So I want to thank you guys for coming today. You've listened to me talk for quite a while, so thank you. Sometimes I talk fast too, so I apologize for that. Go.